president said, I'll be talking about war with the United States. That's some heavy words. My background is political science. I specialize in international relations and public law. So a little personal background first. I'm a Kamehameha graduate, 1982, long time ago. After Kamehameha schools, I went to a military college, New Mexico Military Institute. Got my commission as a second lieutenant, as an officer, and then got my associate's degree, and then transferred to the University of Hawaii, got my bachelor's. Then I went off and played Army. Retired in 1994 as a captain. I was in the field artillery, both active and reserve. And then I walked down this path, and now this is who I am. People refer to me as Dr. Sai, but just call me Keanu. Yeah. I'm an adjunct faculty at the College of Education graduate program at UH Manoa. And I'm also a lecturer in Hawaiian Studies at Windward Community College. Just this morning, I gave a talk at BYU Laie, and I'm doing a full circuit of this island. So I came all the way out here. So what I'm going to do is, and this is a poli-sci course, right? What is this? Poli-sci 110?
180.
Huh?
180, which is.
Oh, what is 180? Oh, Hawaiian political history. Okay, we got 120, 110, 130. I'm waiting. What is 180? Okay. I'm going to be using political science terms. Okay? And I'm going to be explaining things through a political science lens. But we're going to talk about Hawaii and how that applies here. Okay? So you guys ready to walk down this path of no return? Okay. So the unjust war with the United States since January 16, 1893. That's not a political statement. That's actually historical fact. Okay? And you're going to see how that plays out. So first of all, let's start off with this. Hawaii State Teachers Association, back in, when was that, 4th of July of this summer in Boston, Massachusetts. Hawaii State Teachers Association is a union of public school teachers and administrators that are part of an umbrella called the National Education Association Union. It's the largest union in America, okay? And on their Facebook, it says here, today the National Education's Representative Assembly meeting in Boston approved new business item number 37. The NEA, National Education Association, will publish an article that documents the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, the prolonged illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the harmful effects that this occupation has had on the Hawaiian people and the resources of the land. That's pretty heavy. This is in America. They just passed a resolution to document an illegal occupation. Right? Now, when you say illegal occupation, that refers to international law. Right? And if you're talking about an illegal occupation, you have to make sure that you're talking about Hawaii as a country that is occupied, like how Iraq has been occupied, how Japan was occupied by the United States. We're talking country, or what we call independent state status. Right? So there is a lot of things here that can be unpackaged. Right? And that's what I'm going to do today. So where did they come to that conclusion? Well, this person here, Amy Peruso, she also has a PhD in political science, and she's a history teacher at Mililani High School. A lot of military kids go through there because 25th Division, right? And she teaches about Hawaii's occupation. She doesn't politicize it, she teaches it, and that's what's important. Don't politicize historical facts, just teach it. And encourage critical thinking, right? And she would review resources that teachers are using, and if she finds out that the resources that they're using has been outdated, she encourages them to get the most up-to-date research that is coming out at the university level. And one of my books has been used to teach Ua Maokea, which is my doctoral dissertation, watered down for human consumption. It's not so political science legally based. But it's a good starting point. So here, America, the teachers are acknowledging Hawaii's under an illegal occupation. Okay, well, how do we get there? What is that? Well, this book right here, okay, is also another step in exposing it. And this book, Nation Within, The History of the American Occupation of Hawaii, was published by Duke University. Okay, and Tom Kaufman is the author. Duke University is known as a peer review editing process, meaning they just don't let anything get published. It goes through reviewers to check facts, to check theoretical framework and everything. And that was able to get through. Yeah. Now, Tom Kaufman actually came out with that book in 1998, but he didn't have the subtitle here, The History of the American Occupation. What he had was The History of the American Annexation of Hawaii. Annexation, not occupation. These are two different words. So let's take a look at what happened, why he changed it. And that was in 2009. He says, I am compelled to add that the continued relevance of this book reflects a far-reaching political, moral, and intellectual failure of the United States to recognize and deal with its takeover of Hawaii. In the book's subtitle, the word annexation has been replaced by the word occupation, referring to America's occupation of Hawaii. Where annexation connotes or means legality by mutual agreement, the act was not mutual and therefore not legal. Since by definition of international law there was no annexation, we are then left with the word occupation. In making this change, I've embraced the logical conclusion of my research into the events of 1893 to 1898 in Honolulu and Washington. I am prompted to take this step by a growing body of historical work by a new generation of Native Hawaiian scholars. Dr. Keanu writes, not that I get quoted, it's from my Law Journal article. Dr. Keanu writes, the challenge for the fields of political science, history, and law is to distinguish between the rule of law and the politics of power. Tom Kaufman further states, in the history of Hawaii, the might of the United States does not make it right. And that's important, right? Because we're here to look at the facts, not say who's bigger than who. Yeah? Just look at the facts. And he had to come to that conclusion. Hawaii wasn't annexed, meaning Hawaii was never part of the United States. So what we need to do then now is to understand Hawaii within a broader context. And we need to look at Hawaii as a country, as an independent state. Okay, so there is a difference between what is called an independent state and a state. So the term independent is important and crucial. Now, the term state, is basically a political entity, otherwise known as a nation, right? A country, okay? A defined border, centralized government, and people in it. That's a state, okay? Sometimes called a commonwealth, but that's a state. Sometimes called a nation state. You may have heard that before. Now, when you add the word independent in front of it, that's a political term. So, independent, as a political term in political science, means that this state has laws that exist over its territory that is independent of other laws over other territories. So the United States of America is an independent state. Only American law applies over U.S. territory. Canada is an independent state. Only Canadian law applies over Canadian territory. Now, you can be a state and not be independent, which means there's more than one law that is applied in your territory. And that could be state of California, right? So the state of California has California law over its territory, but what other laws does it have over its territory? Federal law, passed by Congress in Washington, D.C. So California is not an independent state, but it's a state. Does it make sense? Okay, that's important. Let's look at American history to explain that further. So in 1776, 13 British colonies committed high treason and they became insurgents, right? Start of the revolution, the American Revolution. The only time you will not be considered an insurgent is when you win the revolution. It took America, 7 years to fight the British to break away. That's when your revolution is successful. In 1783, King George III, under the Treaty of Paris, recognized the 13 former colonies as 13 independent states. So New York, Pennsylvania, Georgia, they were considered independent states individually in a loose union called a confederation. Okay? Confederation. So confederation is a loose union of independent states, like the European Union in Europe. Belgium, Germany, they're still independent, but they're in a loose union for economic purposes, and that's called the European Union. They didn't give up their independence. But in 1789, so from 1783 to 1789, 6 years, let's look at New York. New York was an independent state. Only New York law applied over New York territory, passed by its legislature. But in 1789, each of the 13 independent states gave up their independence into a federal government, creating the United States of America as a federated system, where they remained a state of the Union, but gave up their independence to the United States of America. Does that make sense? So that's how New York moved from from a colony to an independent state to a state, right, within the United States of America. So that term, independent, is important. Now for Hawaii, 1794, Kamehameha I joined the British Empire. Okay? It had the similar status of Tonga. It wasn't a colony, it was actually a protectorate. Okay? That's why we have the Union Jack in the flag. That flag you see flying, that's not the state of Hawaii flag, that's the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. And that's where the Union Jack came from. So Kamehameha joined the British Empire. Now in 1843, November 28th, Queen Victoria recognized Hawaii's separation from Great Britain. And that day was November 28, 1843. November 28 is a national holiday called Independence Day, right? La Kuoko'a. So every November 28 was huge celebration, okay? That's like America's 4th of July. For Hawaii, it's November 28, okay? Now, it also, once it became independent of Great Britain, it entered into diplomatic relations with other states, right? And the Permanent Court of Arbitration acknowledged this. This is a world court in the Netherlands. In its arbitration award, it stated specifically that in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state, recognized as such by the United States, Great Britain, and various other states. Now, what this means legally, it says here that the United States recognized Hawaii as an independent state. What that basically means is any American citizen coming from America to Hawaii is subject to Hawaiian law. So when he gets into trouble, he'll be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law. They cannot claim protection under American law. They cannot claim protection, let's say a British subject comes in from Great Britain. After 1843, he's under Hawaiian law. Now back in the 19th century, you had states that weren't independent, namely Japan. So Japan, it wasn't recognized as an independent state until the latter part of the 19th century. 1899 guarantee is its universal recognition. But up to that point, it was just a state, and other countries would impose their laws within Japanese territory. So an American citizen who gets into trouble in Japan could only be prosecuted under American law in Japan. And the entity that would carry out the trial would be the consulate, the American consulate. It's called consular jurisdiction. So you had that type of a situation with other non-European powers, not just China, not just Japan, but China, Siam, which is Thailand, Ottoman Turks, Persia, which is Iran. Those are non-European powers that were kind of kept outside of this exclusive family of independent states. The thing is, Hawaii was actually in there. And that Hawaii also had an unequal treaty with Japan. So any Hawaiian subject who gets into trouble in Japan could only be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law by the Hawaiian consulate that serves as a court, just like the rest. So by 1893, there were only 44 independent states. They were called the Family of Nations. Now, the Family of Nations is not an organization, right? The best way to think of a Family of Nations, it's a pedigree. It's called pit bulls. That's all it is. Okay? You can be a blue pit bull, you can be a razor's edge pit bull, but if you're a pit bull, you're in the Family of Nations, right? Now, within the Family of Nations, these independent states can enter into treaties with each other. They can create organizations that are going to participate as a member, like the Universal Postal Union, formed in 1874. The Universal Postal Union actually is the predecessor of the United Nations. It's one of the first organizations where countries join and become members, and they participate in a Congress that meets every 4 years to regulate postal services. The Universal Postal Union today exists as a specialized agency of the United Nations. So that's a carryover. Hawaii actually joined the Universal Postal Union on January 1st, 1882. Okay. So as an independent state, it became a member of the family of nations. Now, in international law, as it was developing at this time, the mid-19th century, they distinguished between what is called the state or the independent state and its government. A government exercises the authority of the state. Okay? The state is just the country. And that's important to distinguish between the two. Let's take a look at it in a contemporary example. Leeward Community College. That would be considered like the state. Now, how does Leeward Community College speak? Right? Right now, it's just an idea. Can you actually touch Leeward Community College? What's an idea? It's like grabbing smoke. You see it, but you can't grab it, right? You can touch the wall, but that's not really Leeward Community College, right? What you have is a chancellor that speaks on behalf of Leeward Community College. So the chancellor serves in a governing capacity. Without the governor, without the chancellor, does Leeward Community College cease to exist? No, it says you don't have anybody speaking on its behalf, right? That was understood back then. So states are countries. Governments are the physical manifestation made up of the nationals of that country through whatever constitutional, autocratic, whatever system it has to speak on behalf of that country. Does that make sense? Okay. Because it's going to come into play in how international law works with war. Because in war, between states, war can only exist between independent states. In war, the object is to take out the government, right? But when you take out the government, that doesn't mean you took out the state. Make sense? That's all part of this package called international law. So Judge Greenwood from the International Court of Justice says traditional international law at the time of the 19th century we're talking about was based on a rigid distinction between a state of peace and a state of war. You were either in a state of peace or in a state of war. There was no middle ground, right? It's like you're either hapai or you're not hapai. You're not, am I hapai? Same concept, right? And once you hapai, certain rules apply. But the rules don't apply if you're not hapai. Same concept. So, international law. Clearly, I showed you that Hawaii's in the family, right? It's an independent state, just like the United States of America, just like Russia and everyone else. So international law is seen through two lenses. Peace, this is Lassa Oppenheim, very well-known publicist and scholar on international law. Volume 1, Peace. Volume 2, War and Neutrality. These are the laws of war, and these are the laws of peace. And they're very different. Today, by the Hague and Geneva Convention. So when I was in the Army, that's what we knew when we went to war, that we got to follow. But if you're not at war and you're training in another country, you don't use the Hague and Geneva Convention. You probably use the Status of Forces Agreement, whatever was negotiated with that country to have U.S. military there. Now, Professor Quincy Wright, he's an American advisor to the U.S. State Department, very well known and very well respected. He's a political scientist. He says, war begins when any state of the world manifests its intention to make war by some overt act, which may take the form of an act of war. An act of war is an act of hostility, right? It's not talk. You got to hit. You got to show something. It's got to be something that can be seen, understood, and happen, right? Then it moves into a state of war where the laws of war would apply. So he goes on to say that war in the legal sense means a period of time during which the extraordinary laws of war neutrality have superseded the normal law of peace in the relations of states. So this is pretty much what was going on in the 19th century with Queen Liliuokalani as the head of state for the Hawaiian Kingdom. Now, to keep this in perspective, my great-grandparents, so my tutu's parents, was born in the 1880s. They were born in the country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. This is what I'm referring to. I'm not talking about some sovereignty group claiming to be something. I'm talking about 19th century. Yeah. Now, the Hawaiian Patriotic League, headed by Joseph Navahi, back in December of 1893, submitted a petition to Grover Cleveland in the aftermath of January 17th overthrow. Now, the Hui Aloha Aina, the Hawaiian Patriotic League, was made up of Hawaiian statesmen, legislators, and attorneys. Navahi was an attorney, right, from Hilo, and he served 20 years in the Hawaiian legislature. He also served a short time as Minister of Foreign Affairs for Queen Liliuokalani. So these individuals put together a petition to the United States President. And let's go ahead and take a look at what they said. This past January 17, 1893, a political crime was committed, not only against the legitimate sovereign of the Hawaiian Kingdom, but also against the whole of the Hawaiian nation, the nation who for the past 60 years had enjoyed free and happy constitutional self-government. Now, self-government is a word for an independent state. If you're not a self-government or an independent state, today they refer to that status as a non-self-governing entity, meaning a colony, right? And then to achieve self-governance, they get decolonized. So clearly he's talking about Hawaii as being independent, right? Not being a part of the United States. It says this was done by a coup de main of U.S. Minister Stevens, he's the ambassador, American ambassador, in collusion with a cabal of conspirators, mainly faithless sons of missionaries and local politicians angered by continuous political defeat, who, as a revenge for being a hopeless minority in the country, resolved to rule through foreign help. This is a lot to unpackage right here, right? So again, let's look at it from a political science standpoint. This was done by a coup de main. Coup de main. You guys ever heard of a coup? Yeah, a coup, takeover. Did you know there is the coup d'etat? But there's also a coup de main. A coup d'etat is an internal revolt, internal takeover. It's a revolution, right? A coup de main is a foreign invasion by a military force. That's a coup de main. That means they're referring to what happened in 1893. It wasn't a revolution, it was an invasion. Right? And then I like how they refer to the conspirators, faithless sons of missionaries. We have to dispel with that false narrative that the missionaries overthrew the Hawaiian Kingdom government. No, they didn't. It was their children. It was their grandchildren. They were attorneys. They were judges. They were basically traitors, insurgents, right? But they nailed it right here. You know, that's exactly what happened. So let's now take a look at how does the United States see this situation. Well, President Cleveland reported to the United States Congress on December 18, 1893, 11 months after the takeover, after he investigated his conclusions. Now, this resonates because when a president of the United States speaks, he is a sole representative of the United States. Congress cannot speak or say something that would invoke international law. The United States Supreme Court cannot say anything or decide anything that would affect international law. But the president, as the head of state, can. And that's why it's important that the head of state be careful what he says, because he could trigger certain things. So he says here, on the 16th day of January, 1893, between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this is a Monday, a detachment of Marines from the United States steamer Boston with 2 pieces of artillery landed at Honolulu. The men, upwards of 160 in all, were supplied with double cartridge belts filled with ammunition and with haversacks and canteens, and were accompanied by a hospital corps with stretchers and medical supplies. What do you think they're getting ready for? Looks like it. Looks like they're getting ready for bang bang. Even stretchers, medical supplies. But what does Cleveland see this as? See, that's the key. This is what Cleveland concluded. The military demonstration upon the soil of Honolulu was of itself an act of war. He just triggered an acknowledgement Hawaii's in a state of war with the United States. Right there. Act of hostility. These U.S. troops landed without consent. It's like that's called an invasion. Remember Joseph Navahi in that Hawaiian Patriotic League? It's called a coup de main, a foreign invasion. President Cleveland then goes on to say, with regard to the Queen, if the Queen could have dealt with the insurgents alone, her course would have been plain and the result unmistakable. But the United States had allied itself with her enemies. You see the terms they're using, similar to the terms used by watching CNN, insurgents in Syria, in Iraq. Insurgents are those who commit the high crime of treason. It's a capital crime. If you get prosecuted and convicted, 99.9% you're going to get executed. Right? And under Hawaiian Kingdom law, treason is a capital crime. Okay? So Cleveland is referring to them as insurgents, not businessmen, like how we like to say businessmen overthrew the kingdom. No, insurgents. Now, it's an insurgent, by definition, is a person who revolts against an established government. Commits treason. Now, what does the Hawaiian Criminal Code say about treason? Treason is hereby defined to be any plotting or attempt to dethrone or destroy the king, or the levying of war against the king's government, or the adhering to the enemies thereof, giving them aid and comfort. An alien, which is a non-Hawaiian subject, whether his native country be at war or at peace with this kingdom, owes allegiance to this kingdom during his residence. And during this such residence is capable of committing treason. So even a foreigner can commit treason against the Hawaiian kingdom. It's not just limited to the Hawaiian subjects, just as foreigners can commit treason in the United States. Right? Whoever shall commit the crime of treason shall suffer the punishment of death, and all his property shall be confiscated to the government. And that's what these insurgents embarked on. Bold and audacious. Like, bro, you sure you like going on this road? This is the point of no return. But see, I was a U.S. ambassador. I was telling him, I got your back. I got your back. Really? You got my back? Okay. So the Marines showed up. I'm going to protect them. So President Cleveland then further states, Queen Liliuokalani states in response to that invasion, because you might have a shootout, she writes, I, Liliuokalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Queen, do hereby solemnly protest against all acts done against myself and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional government, a temporary government. Right? That I yield to the superior force of the United States, whose minister plenipotentiary, term for ambassador, His Excellency John Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support these insurgents. Now, to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do this under protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representatives and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as a constitutional sovereign. He's using buzzwords, armed forces, not insurgents. The shootout was going to take place between the U.S. Marines and the Hawaiian police force, not between the Hawaiian police force and the insurgents. See, the insurgents, they didn't have any weapons. It was the Marines that were protecting them. And that situation was now an international matter between the United States of America and the Hawaiian Kingdom. So international law is the lens to explain this, right? Make sense? Bells and whistles on this PowerPoint. Keep everybody's attention. So President Cleveland says, when our minister recognized the provisional government, the only basis upon which it rested was the fact that the Committee of Safety declared it to exist. He just said it exists. He said it was neither a government de facto nor de jure. Political terms. De facto government is a successful revolution, which the 13 colonies became a de facto government after the Treaty of Peace, recognizing these 13 former colonies as 13 independent states. It took them 7 years to fight and win. We're talking a situation here of takeover, a little over 30 hours. Neither de jure. De jure is a lawful government, either elected, appointed, commissioned. They were neither. So, again, de facto government is successful revolution. De jure is through lawful means. They were neither. So what that means is President Cleveland says they're still insurgents and they committed high treason. Then his conclusion here, what happened. By an act of war committed with the participation of a diplomatic representative of the United States and without authority of Congress, the government of a feeble but friendly and confiding people has been overthrown. The term feeble is not derogatory. At the international level, amongst the family of nations, you have big powers and smaller powers. Hawaii was a small power, it's a neutral state. Feeble means not strong. Yeah? But a state, nevertheless, admitting the government was overthrown. So, when we take a look at the distinction between the state and the government, what he says here, government was illegally overthrown. The state still exists, the Hawaiian Kingdom. They're not synonymous. By overthrowing the government, you didn't overthrow the state. Because now the laws of occupation will apply. That's called the laws of war. Okay. Now this is President Cleveland's move to bring back control of that government. I instructed Minister Willis, the successor ambassador to Stevens, to advise the Queen and her supporters of my desire to aid in the restoration of the status existing before the lawless landing of the United States at Honolulu on January 16th, if such restoration could be effected upon terms for providing clemency. Clemency is a pardon. Remember the law of treason? You get executed, and all your property is confiscated. The president was basically asking the Queen, would you grant clemency to these insurgents? Because if you won't, or you don't, or you wouldn't, they're all going to get executed under Hawaiian law. And they can use the American investigation as evidence to prosecute them. They're insurgents. So what you're seeing here is President Cleveland admitted Hawaii is an independent state, acknowledged the separation between a state and a government, took responsibility for the United's illegal overthrow of the government, not the state, and entered into negotiations with the Queen to restore the government. In all this process, the state still exists, right? The country. That's what's important. So although the Queen agreed to the terms of the restoration, they couldn't carry out that agreement. Couldn't carry it out. Did that change anything from the state perspective? Still there, right? But it affected the restoration of the government. But the state still exists. Because America, in its Congress, wanted Pearl Harbor. That was the whole reason why they came here, to fabricate this whole invasion as if it was a revolution by businessmen. They wanted Pearl Harbor. Now, in order to transform the situation back to a state of peace, you need a treaty. The problem is we have no treaty. No treaty. So when you're at war, there are 4 stages that take place. First stage, initiating a state of war, act of war. Okay. Clearly, President Cleveland acknowledged acts of war were committed in the Hawaiian Kingdom, right, by the United States. So he triggered it. Second phase, surrender. Surrender is Queen Lili'uokalani's yielding of authority. But a surrender only seeks to stop hostilities. And then third is supposed to be occupation. The law of occupation requires the occupier, the invader, to serve as a proxy of that government they overthrew and to administer the laws of the occupied state. And then followed by a treaty of peace. whereby the entire country is annexed or troops are removed. So let me give you an example of how this timeline played out with Japan. December 7, 1941, President Roosevelt concluded that the Japanese invasion of U.S. military in Hawaii was in and of itself an act of war, triggered state of war. 1945, Treaty of Surrender, signed on the USS Missouri in Japan, right? Government overthrown. Then belligerent occupation begins, 1945. General MacArthur is the military governor administering Japanese law from 1945 to 1952. 1952, Treaty of Peace, including reparations Japan has to pay for illegal occupations during the war. Then the occupation ended. That's 1952. So from 1945 to 1952, Japan was in a state of war. Some people thought, well, they signed a surrender. Surrender did not terminate the war. Surrender only provided the cessation of hostilities. Another example, Korea. North Korea invades South Korea. You have an armistice signed a few years later. That armistice is not a treaty. Did you know that is still a situation in the Korean Peninsula as a state of war? So when people are saying that guy Kim Jong-un is acting so belligerent, yeah, because he's still at war. It's everybody else that doesn't realize that. But you start to see on CNN, they're saying it. They're saying from a legal standpoint, it's still war. But if you go to Seoul, Korea, you go get some bulgogi, make some good bulgogi, he's still at war. It's just, it doesn't look like war. Just like how you folks all came to class. It doesn't look like war. Actually, from an international law standpoint, it is. Because Hawaii is still an independent state. So you can see how powerful what an independent state is. And that's what Hawaii is. Now you take Hawaii as an independent state out of the equation, then it looks like we're similar to Native Americans. Then we look like we should pursue federal recognition. Once you put the independent state in as to what was Hawaii before the invasion, everything changes. And that's what happened to me, 1994. Thinking, geez, am I in the right army? Because when that balloon goes up, we fire live rounds. I had no problem with that. So we're trained for it. Then I thought I might die for a country not mine. Whoa, what? So I moved from the ONG to the WTF. Yeah. And this was for real. Then I think about my uncles who was drafted in Vietnam. Some didn't come home, they died. Whoa. They died for a country not there. Whoa. That is when, you guys ever saw the movie The Matrix? Matrix 1? That's when I took the red pill. I was like, whoa, my hand going into the mirror. Is this for real? There's another story called Alice in Wonderland. Guess what? I went down the rabbit hole. I'm talking to a teapot. That's what this information does, right? So we basically have become the evidence of the crime. The fact that you don't know any of this is the evidence. But did you know my great-grandparents knew? It's all in the newspapers. Yeah, it's all there. What I'm telling you, I'm not making up. I'm just citing what they said. The question is, how come you never know? Well, there's a reason why we didn't know. So before we get there, let's ensure that we distinguish between the state and the government. You guys got that? Illegally overthrown, Hawaiian state still exists, the Hawaiian kingdom. That is so important and fundamental. It's not your choice. It's just the reality. So on January 17th, Hawaii came under belligerent occupation. The law of belligerent occupation recognizes two legal systems, the occupier and the occupied. According to Judge Crawford, in the International Court of Justice, belligerent occupation does not affect the continuity of the state, even when there exists no government claiming to represent it. So international law actually protects our country, even when we didn't even know what international law was. It locked it. It's like Hawaii went into a cocoon, right? The Hawaiian kingdom, and you can't touch it. But you can change the way people perceive that, right? Fucking brainwashing. So state of peace, state of war, what's the distinction? So in a state of peace, you have economic trade between the citizenries of those at war. Well, not at war, but put those at peace, right? You also have contracts that are protected. So if I'm a British subject with a contract with somebody in New York, I can actually go to a New York court and seek protection, file some complaint, and they got to protect it. Right? Now, during war, trade is suspended. That's an effect of war. You cannot have any relationship with the enemy. Contracts are all void. You see how complicated this thing starts to get? This is precisely what President Cleveland was looking at. That's why he was trying to negotiate with the Queen to bring it back to a state of peace. Because all of this kicks in automatically. Right? In a state of peace, the government administers its laws. Individuals born in that state acquires its citizenry, called natural born citizenship. So if my child is born in America, he acquires American citizenship, but he will also acquire the citizenship of me. You'll be a dual citizen, Hawaiian American. Just like when Mexicans give birth in California, the child is American, but the child is also Mexican by parentage. But the parents are still Mexican, not American. Now, in a state of war, the occupying state, in this case the United States of America, the military, should have administered the laws of the occupied state. There's supposed to be that proxy until a treaty of peace can be negotiated. That's what happened in Iraq in 2003. The Coalition Provisional Authority was formed to replace Saddam Hussein, but keep the same infrastructure of the Iraqi government and administer Iraqi law. That didn't happen here. The reason why it didn't happen here, because they were hiding the occupation. They cannot let the rest of the countries know Hawaii is occupied, because America is trying to get Pearl Harbor. They're trying to use Hawaii as a military base, which today houses 118 military sites. Also headquarters for the Pacific Command, which prompted North Korea to announce in 2013 Hawaii is targeted for nuclear strike, which prompted the false alert and everybody felt vulnerable on a possible nuclear attack. How's that one? This is where it all came from, right? Where it all came from. Now, individuals born in an occupied state during a state of war do not acquire the citizenship of the occupied state. They can only acquire the citizenship of their parents. That rule is there to protect the nationals of the country that is occupied. Because if it wasn't there, then the occupier can flood its nationals into the occupied state, give birth, and overwhelm the national population. So even though Native Hawaiians, who are the majority of Hawaiian subjects, are a minority today, called 20%, actually under the laws of occupation, they still maintain 84% of the national population and the political control. Everyone else is aliens. That's how it works. Now, this was also tested by the Israeli Supreme Court. The Israeli Supreme Court was looking at the Jewish settlements. Did you know the Jewish settlements, one of its purposes was to have Israeli children born within Palestinian territory to acquire Palestinian citizenship, and then with the goal of voting down independence? Went to the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Israeli Supreme Court said these Israeli children did not acquire Palestinian citizenship because Palestine is occupied. This rule kicked in. They are still Israeli. Right? So these are the issues that Hawaii is a part of, whether we know it or not. Hawaii has more similarities to Europe than it has throughout Polynesia. Right? We look like in 1914, German invasion of Luxembourg that took place without resistance. And Luxembourg was occupied for 4 years, from 1914 to 1918. And then the occupation ended. We're in the same boat as an independent state. In 1894, the provisional government, all it did was change its name. They're still insurgents, right? Now, why are they insurgents? Is it because Dr. Sai said they're insurgents? Why are they insurgents? Because President Cleveland said they're insurgents. Not me. I'm just restating what Cleveland said. Right? He's the head of state of the United States. He's the one who investigated. That's why they're insurgents. And Cleveland, his message is what we call dispositive. Anybody know what dispositive means? No question, settled. That's what it is, because the head of state just spoke it. Nobody else can speak beyond that. So that's why we have to look at Cleveland's message on how international relations looks at Cleveland's message. He said it. It's binding. I don't care what newspaper in America said what. I don't care what lawyer said what. The president said it. Game over. You know? Then in 1900, the Republic of Hawaii insurgency changed their name to the Territory of Hawaii. Did you know all they did in 1893 was hijack an existing government? All they did was replace the Queen and her cabinet with Marshall Wilson and replace them with insurgents. Everyone in government stayed the same. Did you know that the police force, the sheriff's department, 1840s, public schools, 1840s, circuit courts, 1840s. Did you know most of the ILH schools is from the Kingdom era? Iolani, 1870s. St. Andrew's Priory, 1860s, right? I think 1870s, late 1860s. Punahou, 1830s. Midpack, Kauai House Seminary. Kamehameha Schools is actually the youngest, 1887, right? So when you think at it from that standpoint, you're going, wow. So all they really did in 1893 was hijack a fine-tuned car and then paint it red, white, and blue. And then make like it's their car and they created it called the United States. So it's like American Airlines and Hawaiian Airlines flying in the sky. The only change was a pilot. And then sleeping gas released and everybody fell asleep. And then red, white, and blue. And then through time, 125 years, the paint is chipping off. People going, it's not red, white, and blue. That's not American Airlines. That's Hawaiian Airlines. Oh, I thought Hawaiian Airlines, there was a hostile merger. There was no merger. It was a kidnapping. Then in 1959, they changed the name from the territory to the state of Hawaii. It's just name change. So since the provisional government was self-declared, so are its successors. The problem is we're now working in the system and we don't even know we're illegal. Now that's pretty good with propaganda. They actually got everybody to believe it, right? And how they're able to do that? Denationalization. So this guy, Samuel Damon, he's an insurgent. He's also the founder of First Hawaiian Bank. He says, if we're ever to have peace and annexation, the first thing to do is to obliterate the past. International law looks at that as denationalization. It's called brainwashing. Okay? Now, who is this guy, Samuel Damon, this insurgent? He was a trustee of Kamehameha Schools. Kamehameha Schools became the flagship of brainwashing. Yeah. And I'm a Kamehameha grad. I was like, wow. Denationalization is the process by which to obliterate the national consciousness of the country. Now, you folks, let's say, are living in 1893, 1898, 1900, around that time frame. Could I convince all of you here, because you're all Hawaiian subjects, can I convince you guys are American? Can I put you through brainwashing? I could, but I'm still not going to change your mind. Now, you may say things to me so you don't get hurt because I'm a big guy. And if I say speak English, oh, okay, bro, speak English. But I haven't changed your mind, right? It's fixed. Right now, it's just, it may go into survival mode. Whose minds can I change? Your children. Guess who's control of all the schools? That's what's going to happen. Now, this is my tutu's generation. Bells and whistles. 1906, program for patriotic exercises to be used in the public schools and private schools. The theme of the program was to indoctrinate the children of Hawaii to be American and to speak English. Did you know you speak you speak Hawaiian in first grade, you get beaten. You hear the stories from the kupuna talking like that. It was actually a policy, right? Because even if a Chinese person spoke Hawaiian, because remember, Hawaiian is the national language of a country, like Spanish is when you speak Spanish in Spain, or you speak Italian in Italy. That's what the Hawaiian language was. It was the national language. It wasn't a bunch of natives in the corner trying to talk to each other. The laws were in Hawaiian and English, but Hawaiian. So even if a haole child was speaking Hawaiian, they get beaten. But most and majority of the students in the schools were native. So we pretty much got the brunt of the effect. So this is Harper's Weekly magazine came to Hawaii in 1906 to do a story on it. Brainwashing. They visited Ka'iolani Public School, Ka'ahumanu, and Honolulu High School before the name was changed to President William McKinley High School. They're part of that brainwashing. And 614 school children in 1906, Ka'iolani Public School in Kalihi, still there, right? Across from Tamashiro Market, which is from the Kingdom era. They're ordered by the principal to line up, march, get in front of the flag, and salute, and yell in unison, "We give our heads and our hearts to God and our country, one language, one flag." Wow, that's what Germans did. Then he goes on to say, "This scene shows a salute to the American flag, which flies in the grounds of the Ka'iolani Public School, which has many Japanese. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children." The term inculcate is to brainwash through repetition. That's the definition of inculcate. That's wild, huh? That's my tutu's generation. By the time I got to my parents, when my dad went to St. Louis, my dad was born in 1939, went to St. Louis, it's already institutionalized. By the time I got to me at Kamehameha schools, out of sight, out of mind, I never know nothing. I was like, what? Let me become an officer in the Army. All my uncles was in the Army. Then I just got hit with reality. I took the red pill. Whoa! This would really make a good movie, huh? Because it's for real. The Matrix was science fiction. This is the Matrix for real. And Keanu Reeves, my cousin, both he and I are Neo. And Morpheus is my tutu, who told me, know your genealogy, because then you know what you gotta do. I went down the rabbit hole. Within 2 generations, the national consciousness of the Hawaiian Kingdom was obliterated and replaced through Americanization. It interfered with the methods of education. Now, did you know that in the Hawaiian Kingdom, by 1893, pretty much everyone could read and write? Compare that with today. Yeah, it's not the same. It compelled education in the English language. It banned the use of the Hawaiian language in the schools. Imposed drafting of Hawaiian nationals into U.S. wars. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. That's illegal. You're fighting for a country that's not yours, and then you die for a country not yours. Those are war crimes. That's what Germany did to those in Luxembourg during World War II. They forced them to fight on their side. Well, they were able to do that because they already brainwashed everybody into believing they're American. Imposed American administrative and judicial systems. Imposed American financial and economic administration. Complete takeover. You know what they call this? In its entirety, genocide. Because genocide is to kill a nation. Homicide is to kill a human. And genocide was coined by Professor Lemke during World War II. And he said the policies of Germany was sought to destroy the nation, not just the physicality of it, but also the mindset, the institutions, everything. So, in light of all of that, can you now see that the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists as a country? And when I stumbled over this information back in 1994, I looked like the odd man out. It's like people thought it was nuts. You know, but I kept saying, oh, but it's all documented. I can't deny it. Well, that's what prompted me to retire as a captain. I got no anger. I'm not angry with the United States. I just realized I don't think I'm American. And I'm in the wrong army. Great training. Loved it. But now I got to pursue this process. So here we know that the government was overthrown illegally, right? That means the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state has been silent. There's no mouthpiece. What we did we're going to take steps to form a provisional government, a temporary government, just like what they did in 1893. But we're going to do it legal. It's called necessity, right? Limited. So since elections cannot take place during occupation, steps were taken in line with how governments in exile were formed during World War II. When Belgium was invaded by the Nazis, they created a government in exile in London. There was no election, but they took it by necessity, called assume the chain of command. We used to do that all the time in the army. A private can become a lieutenant if everyone's killed in the chain of command. It's his duty to assume the chain of command, not his choice. That's to maintain the command structure. And when a properly commissioned officer comes, he goes back down to being a private, or he gets a battlefield commission to make it legal. Right? Until then, he's called the provisional or acting lieutenant. We're going to do the same thing. So a provisional government was established to represent the Hawaiian Kingdom called the Hawaiian State. And the principle relied on was the legal doctrine of necessity. Now, what I want to point out here, I'm talking a lot of legal stuff, yeah? When you play this game, you better know the legal stuff, because it's like you're playing with a knife. You make sure you grab the knife by the handle and not the blade. Because I could commit treason, no different than the guys in 1893, self-declared. But I had this background that I could understand it from my training as an officer. So what is the doctrine of necessity? It's actually a legal doctrine. Well, there is an imperative necessity must arise, the existence of exceptional circumstances not provided for in the Constitution for immediate action to be taken in order to preserve some vital function of the state. It's actually coming from a court case where somebody assumed the role of a governor general in Africa, a British subject. It was actually brought up on treason. This will determine whether or not he committed treason, was the necessity doctrine. There must be no other course of action reasonably available. Actions taken must be necessary in the interest of peace, order, and good government. It can't be revolutionary. You cannot impair the rights of other people of the country. And it must not have the intention of consolidating power. Because if it's consolidating power, that's treason. You're just holding the fort in order to represent the state. This is the newest version of MS Word. So, Hawaiian state, Hawaiian Kingdom government, illegally overthrown, state exists, we formed a provisional government. Now we're going to do it legally. So the purpose of the provisional government as officers de facto is to expose the prolonged occupation. Just expose it. Just talk. Second, ensure the United States complies with the law of occupation. Ensure compliance. And then finally, to provide for an effective transition when the occupation ends. It doesn't represent the people, it represents the state, just like the governments in exile. Now, all of this right here is going to be tested. Right now, that sounds like a good story, huh? You don't know if I made up this whole thing. And I'm trying to convince you that I'm right. You guys don't know, right? And Hawaiians are good storytellers, right? I remember my uncle told me, Keanu, don't bullshit the bullshitter. Okay, uncle. That was when I was in high school. Okay, uncle, you're the top bullshitter. I learned from you. So this is all going to be tested because as we're exposing the occupation, people are listening. And one guy named Lance Larson on the Big Island, he said, so you're telling me after a presentation, we got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. Hey, I know, I understand the situation we have, but you got to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law because I'm supposed to say that. But I understand the situation, but I got exposed. So he decides to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law, which led to his unfair trial and incarceration. He's put in jail. Okay. Now, what ends up happening is his attorney is now coming after the acting government, the provisional government, for not protecting her client. And it's called a tort. The United States committed the violations, but she's alleging the Hawaiian government, provisional government, is liable for allowing American laws to be imposed in Hawaii that led to her client's incarceration. So that arbitration went up to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands. This is the World Court. So they deal with arbitration. Now, the Permanent Court of Arbitration is an intergovernmental organization. It was formed in 1899 to resolve disputes between countries so they don't go to war. Hague Convention number 1. You go to war, Hague Convention number 3 and 2. Okay? So before the permanent court can form a tribunal, an arbitration tribunal to resolve a dispute, it has to meet the criteria where one of the parties has to be a state. Remember that term again, state? So it's what is called institutional jurisdiction. Here's a dispute between two states that was heard at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. It's from the Permanent Court of Arbitration's case repository. Ecuador versus the United States. In 2011, they went to arbitration. And if you notice, they identify the claimant, which is the plaintiff, respondent as a defendant, Ecuador state, United States of America state. Then they formed the tribunal. Then they resolved the issue, right? Now, if none were states, it wouldn't even get through the front door. So private people cannot go to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Another type of dispute is a dispute between a state and an international organization. In this case, Peru versus the United Nations. Name of claimant, Peru State, UN International Organization. Then came the Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom between a state and a private entity. Lance Larson, private entity, Hawaiian Kingdom state. They verify the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists as a country. Meaning, you got to know how the game is played, how the language is spoken, and how to address certain issues. You just don't walk in claiming something that can't be substantiated. So here's the dispute. A dispute between Lance Larson and the Hawaiian government. Lance Larson, a Hawaiian subject, alleges that the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom is in continual violation of these treaties by allowing the unlawful imposition of American municipal laws over him within the territory of the Hawaiian Kingdom. This is from the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So what is inherent in this is, one, the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists. There is a government that is being held liable by a Hawaiian subject. And it's all happening without you even knowing anything. This was 1999 to 2001. From there, it formed the tribunal made up of 3 arbitrators. These 2 arbitrators became judges on the International Court of Justice. So it kind of gives you the caliber of who's involved in this. And then the claimant, Lance Larson, was represented by Ninia Parks, who actually lives out in Makaha. Anybody know Ninia? I know Lynette knows her. And representatives of the respondent called the Hawaiian Kingdom. That's me as agent. So I was actually very much involved in the case itself. So I know it like the back of my hand, right? So this is what the American Journal of International Law summed it all up when the case was finished. At the center of the PCA proceeding was that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist and that the Hawaiian Consular Regency representing the Hawaiian Kingdom is legally responsible under international law for the protection of Hawaiian subjects, including the claimant. In other words, the Hawaiian Kingdom was legally obligated to protect Larson from the United States' unlawful imposition over him of its municipal laws through its political subdivision, the state of Hawaii. As a result of this responsibility, Larson submitted the Hawaiian Consular Regency should be liable for any international law violation that was made against it. Now, the term regency, it's not monarchy. Anybody know what regent means? One who serves in the absence of a monarch. That's a regency. So it's not claiming to be a monarch, that's treason. Serving in the absence on the Hawaiian Kingdom law that's called Article 32, Constitution of 1864. Which means it was verified by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So all of this storytelling that I shared with you has been verified. But you got to know how to speak the terms, the language, in order to proceed. Now, since we returned to Hawaii in December of 2000, after the oral hearings were held in the Netherlands, it was decided that I should enter the University of Hawaii to begin to address the misinformation. And I'm going to enter the political science department, master's program, and get a master's degree specializing in international relations. I'm going to go toe-to-toe with people who are speaking the wrong history. Colonization, indigenous rights, self-determination, wrong. This is called occupation, deoccupation, nationals of an occupied state, humanitarian law, not human rights law. These are all things that are inherent in this system. Right? And I can tell you I wasn't well liked because I basically was turning everything upside down. When I was at the University of Hawaii getting my bachelor's back in 1987, I learned all that stuff. It's not like I'm coming outside not knowing, oh, I learned all that. Now I know this. And when you compare and contrast, completely different, very different. It's like playing football using baseball rules. No, we're playing football. Now we use football rules. And this can happen. Now, this past summer, well, 2 summers ago, something was initiated that got us back to the international level. So since then, since 2001, I've been sharing this information. I sit on doctoral committees. I've been writing law journal articles, peer review, law review, getting this information out so it's not just me, right? It's information that needs to be taught. And something came up. You guys ever heard of the South China Sea case? Philippines versus China. China was building islands in the South China Sea military, turning them into military islands, and claiming a 200-mile radius around each island. Yep, pretty much covering the whole South China Sea. Now, the South China Sea, you got China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines. They all border the South China Sea. And did you know the South China Sea is a flashpoint for possible war right now? U.S. Pacific Command, Pacific Fleet sending ships over there. It's getting pretty tense in the South China Sea, right? Well, that case came up. And this is the South China Sea at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Notice they identified Philippines as a state, China as a state. Just like they identified the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state, the United States as a state. Well, the issue came up regarding what is called the indispensable third party. This is something that Nenia Parks had to deal with, the attorney for Lance Larson. Because in order to hold the Hawaiian government accountable, you needed the United States involved because it was the United States that put Lance on trial, not the Hawaiian government. And Lance was trying to get the tribunal to determine that his rights were violated by the United States, that unfair trial and incarceration. And they're going to hold then the Hawaiian government accountable for those violations. That's a tort. That was the whole thing. But Nenia Parks, on international law, needed the United States to participate, to answer to those violations. It's not about whether or not the kingdom exists. Remember, we're in the court already. This is about whether or not he can hold the Hawaiian government liable. He actually won the case. He couldn't hold the Hawaiian government liable without the United States. It's called an indispensable third party. Did you know that same issue came up with the Philippines and China? Indispensable third party. Up then, there were only up to that point, there were only 2 precedent cases: monetary gold, East Timor. That's what Nenia Parks had to deal with, legal argument. Now, in this case, just last 2 years ago, this issue came up, indispensable third party. And I thought, wow, what if they cite the Hawaiian Kingdom? They did. Paragraph 181 of its decision. The present situation is different from the few cases in which an international court or tribunal has declined to proceed due to the absence of a third party, namely monetary gold, East Timor, and Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom. Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom has just become a precedent case in international law. That's like Roe versus Wade, right? If this case was frivolous, you would not get that cited, but they did. In all of those cases, the rights of third parties or third states, respectively Albania, monetary gold, Indonesia, East Timor, and the United States in the Larson case, would not only have been affected by a decision in the case, but would have formed the very subject matter of the decision. Additionally, in those cases, the lawfulness of activities by third states was in question, whereas here, none of the Philippines claims entail allegations of unlawful conduct by Vietnam or other third states. Remember the other states that bordered the South China Sea? And the case was able to continue. So Hawaii is now part of the international law sector. That's pretty heavy. So remedial prescription, how do you fix the problem? Transform the state of Hawaii into the United States military government to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law. Bring the Hawaiian Kingdom up to par with its international obligations. Provide for the foundation to negotiate a treaty of peace, which will include reparation. And this is what this guy says, which I like, a novelist, Donald Weil. When a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic. That's what people thought I was in 1995. And now, if you want to really learn this, you get to take my class. I get to grade you on it. I want to see if you actually comprehend it. Are you citing appropriate theoretical frameworks, footnote? Now you're applying analytical rigor. So what I'm doing here is I'm not trying to get you to believe in something. I'm just teaching you something. It happened. That's all it is. So what I try to do is ensure that as asking the wrong questions. That's why we've been going down the wrong path. Once you start to ask the right questions, then people start to get very uncomfortable. Yeah, it gets too hot in the kitchen, and I can see it in some of your eyes. Oh, God, is this for real? What? So there is a olelo no ea that I use, Hawaiian proverb, which refers to the kahui vai, the water gourd. So the water gourd is a person, and water in the gourd represents knowledge. The gourd with a little bit of water makes the most noise when you shake it. It's called that one. So when you hear swishing, get more water. Keep filling the gourd. Yeah, keep filling it. Any questions? A lot of information. Got some time. Any questions? Yes.
So, in order for the Hawaiian Kingdom to come into effect, that has to be a government?
No. The Hawaiian Kingdom never left. Remember, that's the state. The permanent court, even if the provisional government wasn't formed in 1995, the kingdom still exists. That's the key. The issue is the state, not the government. But did you know it was because of the government, the provisional government, that got it to the international level? That's what it did. And that's all it did. It's not telling you what to do or how to do it. It's just saying, well, that's what it did. It represents the state. So we have to know that when we talk about Hawaii as a country, it's not about what sovereignty group you belong to. Because the sovereignty movement is based on the wrong premise. It's based on the assumption that Hawaii is a part of the United States and you have entities that want to break away. That's why it's called an independence movement, a sovereignty movement. It's an aspiration. What I'm sharing with you is not about sovereignty being sought. It's about sovereignty already set. And how do you play it within the international system? And you have to know how the terms are used. What is the word independent? As opposed to just being a state who is not independent. What is occupation? What is de facto? What is de jure? What is a coup de main as opposed to a coup d'etat? These are the rules of the game of football. You might say we've been playing baseball all these years because that's what we're led to believe. Now, when you apply football rules to a football game, things actually happen. And that's all this does. It shows that. It's not like it's something spectacular. It's just we're playing the game. And you play this game where you get hit. It's not an easy game to play. Yes?
So because the U.S. wanted to Pearl Harbor, how is Hawaii going to regain its status as a city?
Well, it already is a state. That's how it accessed the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So if it was trying to regain it, how did it access the World Court? The proper question should be asked is, how do you end the occupation? See, that's the question. How do you end the occupation? Not whether or not the kingdom still exists. It exists. The Permanent Court of Arbitration verified it. You end the occupation by exposure. Show the non-compliance. Talk to the international community. And all those treaties that Hawaii has with other countries, those treaties still exist. Foreign nationals in Hawaii are affected by the law of occupation as well. When you look at it through the lens of the law of Iraq and what happened there minus the violence, that's what's here. And that was actually asked by my doctoral committee when I was getting my PhD. First thing they asked was, Keanu, how do you fix the problem? And I said, I couldn't get you to even ask how you fix the problem until you could actually see we got a problem. And that beginning to right the wrong is called education. Just awareness, just knowledge. I'm not saying do anything. I'm just saying write papers, do your research, possibly get peer review, law review. what we have to do is institutionalize the information first. Now, this has been going on since 1995. There's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. And I'm, for one, I do not say that I'm going fishing. Otherwise, the fish come here and swim away. What happens is I come back with the poke, and then you realize what kind of fish I got and where I got it. The permanent court of arbitration is poke. It happened already. I'm cutting it up into cubes, and everybody's eating it. Throw some inamon on top there, limbu kohu, make it a little tastier, not so bland. But I got this poke from The Hague. I got plenty of poke in the refrigerator. I just haven't brought it out yet. But as people are stepping up into this, they're stepping into positions. But you got to be careful. You're also following that, walking a line that you got to make sure you hold on to this knife, not by the blade, but by the handle. Because whatever you say can and will be used against you. So what that means is I can still be brought up on treason if I step out of line by one of you folks who now learn the law and come after me. That's how it works. Make sense? But at this stage, you're poli-sci. This is a poli-sci class. And I appreciate Lynette giving me the opportunity to share this information. I hope I just got you to think something differently. I'm not here to convince you. It is what it is. But I hope that I sparked in you a sense of asking more questions and being more inquisitive. You guys good?
Yes.
Right on. Mahalo.
Let me